Jerry! I'm still angry for being in this episode! Gah! On my last couple of reviews, I've been really ragging on the manga Rent-a-Girlfriend, particularly its character Kazuya Shida, particularly since he doesn't really grow. Every time he shows some bit of progression, the reset button has to be pressed. To be fair, Chizuru really does egg this guy on, particularly in the last chapter where she ends up kissing him. So tell me, what's Jerry Smith's excuse here? Here's another character that doesn't really grow. He's constantly being put back to where he was, back to square one. And I know why. Dan Harmon doesn't like progression of characters outside of the two main leads. And even then, I can probably doubt it. Jerry is always going to be weak. And in every universe, he's always going to be weak. He particularly is nothing more than just a useless leech. This week's episode definitely proved it. Now, we do get the interesting scenario where we find out that Rick's fooling around with reality does cause holes, particularly the other Ricks that do this. As you know, when the episode starts up, we meet Mooch. He's a Jerry with a 5 o'clock shadow, and he spends his entire life basically going from one dimension to the other, leeching off the other Jerrys and their lives, including our Jerry. After our Jerry finally tackles Mooch, they take him to the mall. Jerry says he's thinking about getting a job at American Eagle, in which he gets the nickname Eagleman, which we'll call him the rest of this review. It does lead to some of the funnier moments of the episode. I have to say this, the Ricks in this episode are amongst the funniest Ricks we've kind of dealt with, particularly our C-137. After Jerry makes a little bit of small talk with him, I just love the fact how upset Rick gets. I particularly love it when Jerry goes up to his room and Rick just yelling in the background. Okay, our two Jerrys, they find a little hole in the closet and they go into a couple other dimensions. And this once again leads to why Jerry is such a bad father. In the other dimension, Summer, very distressed, comes up to him and all he says is blah. Jerry, this is a pretty simple idea. Take your daughter into your arms and you go blah, 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 blah. That's the correct answer. Eventually we come to an Ice Age dimension and it's very sad to see the family huddling and frozen over into ice cubes. At this point, Mooch and Eagleman are inducted into our Travelers situation, in which they go from one dimension to the other. By the way, in the opening sequence, remember where we have the goat family eating a can? Yeah, that actually happens in this episode. The Jerrys miss one of the points where they're supposed to follow the Rick and Mortys into the portal, and they end up having to go through a burlap sack, which takes them to Grand Central. And here's where we meet Boss Jerry. Now, Boss Jerry has some funny moments, particularly with his Rick, how he bullies him around. In fact, I do like the scene where Rick tries standing up to him, where he's like, "You're a mean Jerry. Ever since you got that jacket, you think you're cool." Where Jerry continues to bully him. It is funny that the best Jerrys happen to be the dimensions where the Ricks are often the weakest. However, this Jerry does have a couple of problems. One, he's excessively petty. Think about how petty Rick has been throughout the series. Yeah, this one's even more petty because our Jerry, Eagleman, comments the fact that, hey, that's my PIN number. It probably makes sense that everyone used the same PIN number since they're the same person. But after that, then he decides to have his rogue Jerrys, or orphan Jerrys, apprehend the two. And then after Eagleman says that C-137 kick his ass, well, guess what? He ends up having the two banished, sent back to Mooch's dimension. Now, I'm pretty sure you remember Morty Night Run. That's where we meet Paul Fleshman, CPA. Well, this is the dimension he's from. And he married Beth, and has been taking care of Mooch's family. Does anyone find it very suspicious the fact that the only person that was surprised yet enthusiastic about Jerry's return is Paul? The other family was surprised but didn't really care about him at all. We do get a little heart-filled moment when Eagleman reveals that Mooch did actually miss them, in which they all hugged. And of course, Mooch's Rick immediately insults him. Also leads to another great moment where he's off camera yelling at it. Mooch's Rick decides to open the portal back to Grand Central. At that point, we have a montage of the various Jerrys going through dimension to dimension. Eventually, they end up back in the burlap sack portal dimension. We do have an interesting moment where Boss Jerry actually tries to insult Mooch by saying he's going to have intercourse with his wife, in which Mooch says, well, he's already married. Eventually, Boss Jerry points a gun and shoots it at the two. Immediately, the two get out of the sack, and then Mooch cuts the rope. Boss Jerry is lost forever. Eventually, the two get Jerry back home, or Eagleman. Eagleman decides to leave the coaster down, which means that it's all right for other Jerrys to come in which our Rick apparently knows this is going on, and says, might be best the other Jerrys come in. We do find an interesting moment here where the two, Rick and Jerry, find commonplace. The fact they both like Naked and Afraid. Particularly the guy really liked drinking yak urine. And apparently, the best way to watch Naked and Afraid is actually naked in your couch. Another thing we learned in this episode is that Morty likes having intercourse with sea creatures. In Rick Lantis' mix-up, he decides to mate with mermaids. In this episode, he decides to mate with an octopus. I'm pretty sure that Hayato Miyajin would really like to get revenge on Morty. By the way, Rama 1/2, the second season, comes out in October. Enjoy! This episode is kind of frustrating. I mean, it does have a lot of great funny moments, but unfortunately, we're also dealing with two characters you know right off the bat will never, ever develop. They've been so flanderized, they will not change, regardless. Jerry Smith is a case where he's never going to evolve. This is a middle of the pack episode. So anyway, I'll see everyone next week for episode 9. Bye!